Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the briefing session for the 20th of May 2025. I will declare this meeting open at 6:15. The town of Bassendean acknowledges the Wadjuk people of the Noongar Nation as the traditional custodians of this land. We pay our respects to elders past and present and acknowledge their continuing culture and the contribution they make to the region. Councillors, again, I would request that those who are present in the room, Councillor Burke, you came in late. Have you signed the Declaration of Civic Duty? Thank you very much. Councillor Ames, can I request that you verbally confirm that you will in good faith declare that you will duly, faithfully, honestly and with integrity fulfil the duties of your office for all the people of the town of Bassendean?
That is correct, I do. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Okay, thank you. So we'll now move on to attendances and apologies. So Councillor Ken John was with us electronically for the special council meeting, however has retired from this meeting. Councillor Ames is joining the meeting by electronic means. Director Mr. Paul White, Director of Corporate Services, is joining the meeting by electronic means. I don't believe that we have any other members missing from the meeting.
No, ma'am.
We now move to item 5.1, which is statements. Statements at a briefing council session must relate to an item on the OCM agenda being considered. Statements are to be directed to myself. If you would like to make a statement, please raise your hand, and when I indicate, come to the podium and provide your name and address. Now, we do have some deputations which will come after this. So one deputation is from Lucien Watkins, and the other is a statement from Michael Roberts. Michael Roberts will attend the meeting in person. So if you'd like to come to the microphone and read out your statement. And could we have your name and address too? Thank you.
Okay. Hello, how's that? So my name's Michael Roberts. I live at 47 Kathleen Street in Bassendean. I've lived on Kathleen Street for 11 years and lived with my wife and two kids who are aged 7 and 3. We found our forever home and love Bassendean due to the history, space and environment it offers. We're also the rear boundary neighbours of 70 Kenny Street, which is agenda item 12.2, and have ongoing concerns around the design and impact of the proposed ancillary building. The focus of the February Council meeting, when you first discussed the designs, and subsequent design changes have sought to address the design concerns from the streetscape. However, there have been no efforts to address the concerns raised by myself and two other neighbours impacted by the ancillary building and the balcony overlooking our properties. The amended plans still fail to address the Kenny Street Heritage Area Development Standard, which requires sufficient rear setback to ensure the retention of open space and backyards, as well as our Code 5.5.1 that requires ancillary dwellings to positively contribute to its setting, including where visible from the street or from adjoining properties. Page 119 of the appendix to tonight's agenda provide a graphic of the elevations for the western boundary. Our land is set 1.1 metres below ground level to the west of Kenny Street, and as such we'll be looking onto a 7.5 metre high white box rather than the mature pear trees that previously existed. The use of white collar bond for the exterior will reflect heat and light into our yard from the afternoon sun, and is a visual contrast to the efforts we have made to create a natural backyard space for our kids. Additionally, while efforts have been made to make the balcony atop the garage compliant through permanent and planted screening, the height of the proposed balcony means anyone taller than 1.6 metres, about this high, will look into our pool area and outdoor shower. The plan does not allow for any backyard per the Kenny Street Heritage Area Development Standard, and does not contribute positively to the setting of the adjoining properties. While I understand your desire to accept the proposal, given costs will be incurred if the plan proceeds to a final hearing, I believe there has been insufficient consideration to the concerns raised by the 3 impacted neighbours, as well as the precedent it sets for future development within the heritage areas covered by the local planning policy number 4, the heritage and character. As such, I would request that Council affirms their original decision until a design is put forward that meets the intent of the relevant standards and R codes for the adjoining properties.
Thank you, Mr Roberts. If you could stay there. Councillors, sorry, it's a statement. It's not a deputation. Okay, no questions, councillors. Thank you, sir. If you'd like to take your seat.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay, we also now move on to public question time. Again, questions must relate to an item on the OCM agenda, and I think that the other person is a deputation. Val, we have one emailed question sent in by Val Humphrey from Whitfield Street in Bassendean. Val is not in attendance tonight, so I will read out her question, although this will probably be provided back by email, is that correct?
Exactly.
Yeah, okay. I will read out the question that the project for Jubilee Reserve automated irrigation scheme has been initiated to reduce the draw on groundwater at Jubilee Reserve, which is a good thing for the health of the patch of bushland, and also for the reserve, assuming that the detail would have been deliberated on when the tenders were evaluated. Please can you provide the detail of the measures that will be taken and how this will be monitored once installed? Members of Bassendean Preservation Group are very interested and would appreciate having a good understanding what is being done to reduce the stresses on the bush. Many thanks. So my understanding is that the officers will prepare a response and provide that back to Ms Humphreys by email. Okay. So unless there are any other questions from members of the audience, we will now move on to deputations, which is item 5.3. Deputations, I believe we have one deputation from Mr Watkins. Mr Watkins, would you like to come to the podium and provide your deputation?
I live at 72 Kenny Street, which is the neighbour of 70 Kenny Street, with my wife and child. Thank you for the opportunity to address Council again. As an immediate neighbour, we want to express our objection to 3 boundary walls on the revised plans, which have only undergone minor changes since the matter was last before Council. The R Code stipulate that a property is only to have a maximum of 2 boundary walls to be deemed to comply. These plans still have 3 boundary walls, one of which, the north side, is a significant 4 metres high and 13.8 metres in length. The boundary wall proposed for our property line on the south side is smaller at 3.5 metres high and 7.5 metres in length. However, it is the position and utility of this wall which is of serious concern to us. This wall will form part of a 2-storey ancillary dwelling with a 2nd-storey roof deck which will look directly into our backyard. It does not follow the R Code design principles which state that boundary walls should, and I quote, minimise the extent of overlooking and resultant loss of privacy on adjoining properties, not have any adverse impact on the amenity of the adjoining property, and positively contribute to the prevailing or future development context and streetscape as outlined in the local planning framework, end quote. We do not consider a 1.6 metre, 75% obscure screen to be sufficient to protect our privacy, considering the position of this roof deck, which essentially functions as a viewing platform into the backyard where our children will play. Prior to moving into Kenny Street, we lived in an apartment complex where such intrusions of privacy were expected. One of the reasons we bought our house in Kenny Street 18 months ago was the character of the street, with mostly single-storey houses at the front of the blocks and big backyards at the rear. We had no idea that planning principles would allow a development such as this, which basically reverts our privacy to the same level we experience in apartment living. At a minimum, we ask that this boundary wall be removed, which would allow us more privacy by way of the roof deck not directly adjoining our property. However, we do question how this ancillary dwelling in itself could be deemed to comply with the Town of Bassendean's local planning policy number 4, heritage and character. This policy states that, and I quote, the development shall be cited to be parallel to the street and setback consistent with the predominant building setbacks within the streetscape. Sufficient rear setbacks shall be provided to ensure the retention of open space and backyards, end quote. We failed to see how the proposed ancillary dwelling complies with this policy, which completely removes any space for a backyard on their property. This concern was raised in the initial report by the town's planners, but has not been addressed in this second report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Watkins. Councillors, would you like to ask questions? No? Councillor Carter.
Oh, thank you very much. Now, to be clear, you're adjoining which on the right or the left-hand side of the building in Kenny Street?
The south side, so left.
Left.
If you're looking at the street, on the left side, yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay, I know it now. And your objection is mostly to the rear ancillary building?
Yeah.
And the rear ancillary building, because of its height and because of its, I don't know, what was the word you used? Its intrusive nature of what it was.
Yeah, well, if someone's on the roof deck,
Yeah.
they can look into our backyard.
Okay.
Like, no one would want that.
Right. Can I just ask one more?
Yeah.
That most two-storey developments are allowed under the zoning scheme, and you'd get that problem with the two-storey development anyway?
Well, if I understand your question, if someone is building a two-storey house, that's at the front of the property. So the second storey would look into a building.
Right.
Whereas in this case, the dwelling's at the back of the property, so it's looking into someone's backyard.
I see. And
So-
it's very close to the boundary fence?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillors, further questions on this one? Gentlemen, this is one of the first items which the officer will be providing information on, so you're more than welcome to stay. Okay. So that brings us to the end of questions, deputation statements.
You might go back to declarations just in case, because we missed declarations. If I can find it. Oh, there's no. Oh, yeah, it's number 3, sorry.
No, I thought I asked. Councillors, sorry, I'll just check. There are no declarations of interest on these items. No. Okay.
We did for the special council meeting.
Yep. Councillor Ames, you have no declaration of any item on this agenda, do you?
No, I do not, Madam Mayor.
Okay. Thank you, councillors. Apologies. Okay. So with that, councillors, we'll now go to the reports, and I will ask our planning director to actually provide some information on the first item, which is item 12.2, single house and auxiliary dwelling number 70 Kenny Street.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So item 12.2 is a Section 31 reconsideration for a single house and ancillary dwelling at 70 Kenny Street. The key changes in the plans are outlined in the report to council. So obviously the town's been extended the opportunity by the SAT to reconsider its original decision. So we've heard some statements from the owners of the adjoining properties about their concerns with respect to the development. However, whilst the development still proposes 3 boundary walls, when the structure is viewed from their premises, they will be viewing what would be considered a deemed to comply development, and the neighbour to the north of the development has no objection. The boundary wall to the neighbouring, to the property to the north of the property to the north does have a boundary wall variation by virtue of the length and height, but this boundary wall generally abuts a blank wall to a development setback 0.9 metres from the common boundary, and as such will have minimal impact on their amenity. The development satisfies the visual privacy requirements of the arcoids, and to reinforce the screening, a condition of development approval is recommended should council resolve to approve the development. So that cannot be a reason for refusal. It satisfies the deemed to comply requirements. I understand the commentary about a 1.6 metre high screening, but that is the standard set by the arcoids as to what restricts the cone of vision. The dedicated outdoor living area remains non-compliant with the minimum 4 metre dimension required by the arcoids. This is due to the inclusion of the required reversing area and results in a minimum dimension of 3.3 metres proposed. If you include the reversing area, if that's not in use, it equates to about 8 metres, so it's more than sufficient. And the space is still usable and functional, particularly with the removal of previous obstructions between the ancillary dwelling and single house. The area optimises the northern aspect and can be utilised in conjunction with the primary living space of the dwelling. In our view, it satisfies the design principles. Arguably, the most significant modifications of the proposal is the revision to the development's external colours and materials for the front residence and the relocation of the two-storey portion of the front elevation to the southern side of the building. The use of recycled bricks provides contrast to the previous all-white colour palette of the front elevation to the southern, and the relocation of the two-storey element to the southern side of the building results in this portion now being in line with the dwelling on the adjoining property rather than forward as previously proposed, significantly reducing the impact of building bulk and scale on the streetscape. Although the design retains its features of modern architecture, when coupled with a revised material selection, which introduces a now varied colour scheme, the revised proposal presents as a development that responds to the context of the Kenny Street area. The revised design is sincere not to present as a heritage building by attempting replication, but rather to integrate with the area, an approach encouraged by LPP4. On this basis, the administration has recommended council reconsider its decision and approve the development. Also, in relation to the commentary about the backyard and the rear setbacks, in the absence of more detailed and prescriptive provisions for rear setbacks within the local planning policy, we defer to the arcoids, and this development is generally compliant. If you look along sections of Kenny Street, there is development up to a 1 metre, 1.5 metre setback at the rear. From the rear. Any questions?
Okay, councillors' questions. Councillor Burke.
Through you, Madam Mayor, question to Alex. In regards to materials you talked around at the front, at the back, and I heard from one of the statements, was the glare. Are there any guidelines in regards to the codes as to type of material, including, an anti-reflective coating? If you could help me understand any guidance there.
No, glare isn't considered a valid planning consideration. It's very difficult to measure. Different times of the day, the sun's at different angles. It's not something considered under the planning framework.
And those materials comply with the codes at the rear?
The local planning policy number 4 has a focus on the streetscape and essentially the front dwelling. There's less impact or less consideration for rear developments. If you look at the general requirements under 2.1 of local planning policy number 4, it's very much a heavy focus on the existing streetscape, and that's what this development is trying to preserve.
Thank you, Councillor Carter.
Oh, thank you. In talking about the setback and the streetscape, are there other houses along this street with a similar setback?
To the primary street or the rear?
No, to the primary street.
To the primary street. So if you look at the development plans, it'll show the correlation. I think it's the first plan, or might be, the first plan. You can see the shadows of the neighbouring properties. So it's in line with the neighbouring property to the south. 68 property to the north is set exceptionally far back. but it is consistent more broadly with, the development at 70 is consistent more broadly with the streetscape along Kenny Street. If need be, an aerial image can be circulated to council, which reflects the streetscape. You can see it quite clearly when looking at 72, and it's going to be in line with that, and that aligns broadly with 66, 64, and 74 Kenny Street.
Thank you.
Councillor Polifka?
If I could take you to it's drawing 4. So that's so there you have the
Which drawing is it, Councillor Polifka?
So that's drawing 4. So on the ones prepared by United Studio, it's page 116 of
Yep.
our materials. So there we've got the manoeuvring zone. So that car that's parked in the garage, which has the 2 parapet walls, the car reverses out into the manoeuvring zone. And then if we then scroll back to drawing 3, we're talking about a proposed new medium-large tree and native planting. So I'm just wondering what the interaction would be between a large tree in that location and the proposed manoeuvring, and I suppose that in the context of providing the requisite deep soil zone for a medium-large tree to thrive.
So as I understand it, that tree does sit outside that manoeuvring area. In terms of that manoeuvring area, it could be permeable paving, which would still enable a medium tree to grow. That area more broadly in between the ancillary dwelling and the main residence at the front is above, I think they've annotated on their plan at 52 metres squared, which is more than sufficient for a medium tree.
And I understand with the drawings like this, the convention is that you would simply put a dot where the trunk would be. Has any allowance been made for the ultimate size of the trunk? I mean, a trunk could be a metre in diameter, it may be larger if the tree's given a chance to grow.
I'll have to take that one on notice, if you don't mind. I'll just get
not a
confirmation
problem. It's
from
the
the
point
designer
of
on
the
it.
briefing.
Yes,
So, very, very happy with that being considered. And I suppose the follow-up to that would then be whether, in terms of the deep soil zones, rather than having them sprinkled around the lot, it would be better if they were all consolidated. So do we know how large a deep soil zone is in the location of that tree, and is it sufficient to support a medium to large tree?
Take that on notice, thank you.
Councillor Polifka, and then I've got Councillor Ames who's waiting.
And just while I've got that drawing, so I'll let you, drawing 4. So return to that issue about the garage. So I understand that generally, to a side boundary, you can have a parapet or a 0 setback wall. Is it usual for there to be 2 0 setback walls, or would you generally only grant one being to the side boundary as opposed to having it both on the side and the rear boundary?
As of right, the R codes allow to have 2 boundary walls. This one's slightly different in that it is proposing 3 because the northern wall associated with the main residence is proposed to be set back 300 mil. So anything inside 600 mil is considered a boundary wall, and that's the variation to the deem to comply. And then it becomes an assessment against the design principles. And the main assessment there would be the impact, or one of the assessments there is the impact on the amenity of neighbouring properties. By virtue of the nature of the walls to the property to the southern and side boundaries and the rear to the west, they're deemed to comply and meet the deemed to comply requirements of the R code. So from a planning perspective, the amenity impact on the neighbouring properties is within the accepted threshold, and then when you're assessing it against the property to the north, it's essentially sitting next to a blank wall with the exception of a relatively small window, which as we understand it sits essentially above the kitchen sink. That wall is set back only 900 mil from the lot boundary on the southern side in terms of natural light that wall and window would receive. It's relatively negligible. And on that basis, from a design principle assessment, we're comfortable with the provision of having 3 boundary walls.
So I suppose to explore that, say this the dwelling towards the street side of the property had been constructed, an application was then put in to construct the auxiliary dwelling, would this property have already exhausted its allowance of one boundary wall with the main residence, and would the auxiliary dwelling then only be granted one more?
From a deemed to comply perspective, yes. It doesn't discriminate between ancillary dwelling and dwelling. It's two boundary walls. The R codes stipulate the length and height requirements that each boundary wall can be. In terms of if for example, that boundary wall to the northern side was set back a distance of greater than 600 mils and it wasn't considered a boundary wall and it was just a setback variation from, say, 1 metres, the garage boundary walls would be deemed to comply and be a non-issue.
Final quick question. I see you've noted on the same page, the footprint is 35 square metres. It says the maximum is 70 square metres. Do we assess auxiliary dwellings based on their footprint or the internal area?
It's the internal area, which would be 70 square metres as a maximum, but a garage isn't included in that. It's habitable floor area.
But in terms of that, so if the footprint of the lower floor is 35 square metres, so the upper is 35 as well, so that's designed to fit within that 70 square metres?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Councillor Ames.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and through you, directed through to Mr. Snadden. In relation to the conversation that Councillor Burke had alluded to in regards to different coverings or construction materials to the rear of the premise, you've obviously stated that everything is being deemed to comply with the revised designs. Is there an opportunity, or has there been an opportunity between the proponent and the rear neighbour to discuss appropriate construction materials to satisfy, obviously, the construction itself and the aesthetic nature coming from the rear? And if not, can that be arranged, or how does that work in regards to, neighbourhood-friendly construction materials?
I'll have to take that one on notice, Councillor Ames. As I understand, I don't believe there has been discussion between the neighbours, but I'm not too certain. I'll need to check, potentially check with the neighbour while he's here. Has there been discussions? Yeah. So we can simply ask the question of the developer, but decision-making isn't delegated to neighbours. It's delegated to either staff or, in this instance, council.
Yep, that's understood. But if, there's more conversation that can be made for everyone's longevity and happiness within the community, it might be a good start. So, but I thank you for your response, and we'll move on from there. Thank you.
So, thank you. I'd like to ask a question first, Councillor Plivka. In respect to consultation with the neighbours, am I correct, if I've read this correctly, that there was, even though the main building has flipped now, it's reversed, there's no consultation with that neighbour this time round, is that right?
Through you, Madam Mayor, that is correct. We haven't undertaken consultation with the revised plans. From an administration perspective, we're comfortable with the design, noting the extent of boundary wall to that property to the north is also since reduced in both height and length, and they didn't have an objection to it previously. We're more than comfortable with not advertising it to them.
Okay. Dare I ask, the neighbours who have obviously come tonight are aware of this new plan, so was there any notification put on the front of the site that there were revised plans? No.
No. We informed them that it was being presented to council.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Plivka?
Now, I know council has the ability to, in approving, granting a development approval, to insist upon trees in particular locations remaining in perpetuity. I noticed that along the rear boundary they do have the rain garden specified, so presumably something will have to be planted there. I don't think you have a rain garden and just leave it barren. Is there a prospect for, and I heard the the neighbours mentioned that previously there had been some ornamental pear trees or something. Would there be scope for, I suppose, in the context of what Madam Mayor has mentioned, for there to be a discussion around what might be planted there and the screening effects that those could have?
Yes, we can. We can inquire. We could potentially have a condition for a landscaping plan, noting there will be details of the rain garden to be provided at the building permit stage. So that condition, I believe, will be condition 5 of the approval. But yeah, we can inquire with them if they can provide us further details before council makes a decision next week.
Great, thank you.
I didn't see the need for a landscaping plan in these conditions. Did I miss it, or? It's possibly there. I just, there's quite a few conditions.
Yeah. So the details of the rain garden are to be depicted on the plan submitted in association with the building permit application and maintained on site for the life of the development. So that condition could be extended to be providing a more detailed landscaping plan.
Okay, so so we could have an expanded condition on that.
Yes, we
That
could.
would be interesting. Okay, would you, as an officer, be able to offer some wording around that?
I can draft that up and
Okay.
send it through by the end of the week.
Okay. The other question, if we're talking about landscaping, I note here that the verge tree is maintained and then they've got proposed native verge planting. Is that a requirement that they must do a verge transformation, for lack of a better word?
No, that is not a requirement.
Okay. And I would assume it would not be something that you could impose upon the proponent?
No.
No, okay. Okay, councillors, further questions? Councillor Burke?
Sorry, I just had one other, just in regards to that rain garden. It's, what is it, just under 2 metres. I'm wondering if there are concerns from neighbours, whether there might be some sort of landscaping that might minimise. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll follow up with the developer if they can provide us additional information between now and next Tuesday, as per Councillor Plifka's question, to see if there's any potential for additional screening that they may have.
If I could ask one more question. If we're talking about the setbacks, and previous questions have been about the garage, and it's been mentioned by one of the neighbours, if this existing plan was amended and that setback, which is right abutting the property line, was changed, that would then have a flow-on effect, if I'm correct, that your reversing would also not work. Would that be correct?
Depending on the changes to that setback, for example, if that garage was moved 1 metre further to the north, that reversing area would also need to move 1
Yep.
metre further to the north.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Councillors, if there are no further questions, we will move on. Councillor Plifka?
Yeah, just following on from the Mayor's train of thought and having a look at the garage. And look, I don't know if the car's to scale or what that's indicating, but would it be possible to truncate the garage? So rather than move, or a combination of, maybe moving it 30 centimetres to the north and maybe reducing the size of the garage. I don't know what size it is, because obviously they still need to be able to accommodate a motor vehicle. But is there scope for amendments along that way, which would then, I suppose, potentially overcome the overlooking issue if suitable vegetation were planted along that boundary?
Modifications could be looked at potentially, but that's not what staff has recommended. And there is, from a planning perspective, there is no visual privacy issue. It is deemed to comply.
Right, so you'd be, okay. Oh, yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much, one and all. We'll move on to the next item. So this is 12.3, Draft Local Planning Policy Number 2, Sustainable Development. And Ms. Snadden, this is yours as well.
Also me.
Thank you.
So the purpose of this report is for Council to consider adopting a draft amended Local Planning Policy Number 2, Sustainable Development. The draft amended Local Planning Policy seeks to essentially remove provisions that specifically relate to new dwellings in split-coded areas when development is enacting upon the higher density. The first change being the deletion of Attachment A and the credit point checklist option. The administration originally removed this element in June 2023, pending the changes to the R codes and the introduction of the medium density code, which was subsequently deferred. As a result, in November 2023, the administration sought to reintroduce the credit point checklist, noting the deferral of the R codes. However, the medium density codes have now been introduced and sustainable development sufficiently covered within the medium density codes, which is where all our split-coded higher density lots would be assessed against. There's notionally been some conflict between the R codes and the credit point checklist as well. The R codes, from a solar access and ventilation perspective, look at essentially the solar access at different points of the day, so from 9 a.m, midday, 3 p.m, and it's more extensive as to where orientation of windows and the like should be, and the credit point checklist essentially is a flat line of the sun is from the north, so there's a bit of conflict there. And the second modification is the deletion of the requirement for development to achieve an energy efficiency rating which is 1 star above the current Building Code of Australia. This is due to the change that the NCC now mandates a 7-star energy efficiency rating, so this came into effect this month. The town has also received that we've received advice that achieving an 8-star energy efficiency rating, which would be now 1 star above the new minimum, comes at a significantly higher cost with limited additional benefit at this point, so the cost benefit just isn't there yet. Furthermore, in accordance with Section 131 of the Planning and Development Act, where there is discrepancy between a local planning scheme and by extension a local planning policy, and a building standard specified in the building regulations made under the Building Act, the regulation will prevail. On that basis, if that was ever challenged and we enforce that via a condition and that element of the policy, I don't believe that would stand up in the SAT. Given the proposed changes to the policy are relatively minor, it is recommended that the draft amended policy be adopted without undertaking any consultation.
Thank you. It is good to see that the design requirements have gone up to a level 7. Took a while. Councillors, do we have questions? Councillor Polifka.
So as I understand it, these, I suppose, stricter requirements originally applied to these split density coded sites?
So these requirements only apply to the split coded sites where development is being undertaken at the higher density. We aren't proposing to delete the requirements for retained dwellings to be upgraded with solar panels and the like, or the provisions that apply to all new single houses, which is the roof absorbance rating, rain garden, provision for electric vehicle charging bay, and the remainder of the policy essentially.
So in terms of what's required for any new dwelling, as opposed to those which are people are seeking, I suppose, the concession of being able to develop to the higher extent on a split code, what additional things are they doing over and above what would be required of just a single residential dwelling?
By virtue of this proposed amendment, there wouldn't be anything. They'd be subject to the same requirements as any new single house that required development approval from the town. It would just be subject to an assessment under Part C of the medium density codes, and their sustainability provisions would apply.
Look, I understand taking those stricter requirements and putting them on all residential dwellings. I mean, we say that's our baseline. But in terms of if we were minded to say to somebody that, well, you've got these split codings, if you wish to develop to the lower of the code, that's a less intense development, then you have to comply with just the regular rules relating to a sole residential dwelling. But in terms of something where they want to extract more development potential from the site, are we able to extract more in terms of a better development?
From a solar access and natural energy efficiency perspective, that standard is within the R codes itself. So from R30 above, the medium density codes apply, which is where all our split codes, the higher coding starts. It's either R20, R30 or R20, R40. So that higher development at the higher density code has a separate assessment. It's under Part C of the R codes, and by virtue of that, additional kind of sustainability measures from the R codes perspective kick in.
Right. So if you do it to the higher level, whatever the appropriate document is for that particular R code will apply. But in terms of somebody making the election to develop at the more dense of the R codes, there isn't anything additional they would have to do in order to, I suppose, exercise the right to that higher level of development.
That would be correct.
Okay. And in terms of that, is the town able to require a higher quality development where we're allowing a denser development?
We could try, but for example, if we went through for the option and we retained the option for the 1 star above, if that was challenged in SAT, the building regs would prevail and it would fall short. If you wanted us to explore different sustainability measures or that could be embedded within a local planning policy that may have a chance of standing up, the town's administration could look to do so.
Yeah, I suppose the approach would be, we don't mind people coming in, developing, allowing more housing for people, but we want that done well. So anything, I suppose, that you could offer around that would be most welcome. Thanks.
Councillors, further questions on this one? Okay, we'll move on to 9.4, which is draft unwanted species list. I know there'll be questions on this one. So again, if you would like to speak to this one first.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The purpose of this report is for Council to consider adopting an unwanted tree species list that includes 6 species. This list has been developed in accordance with the town's sustainability and environment team, so I thank them for their input in developing this list, and will serve as an addendum to local planning policy number 13, tree retention and provision. The list will not require the removal of any of these trees, but simply exempt the listed species from requiring development approval from the town, should the owner choose to remove them. So this draft list was circulated to the elected members via the bulletin earlier this month, and we did receive some feedback from Councillor Polifka, and staff provided a response to those comments. I'm not going to try and pronounce the Latin names of these species either. I'm not that good. Any questions?
Okay, councillors, questions on this one? Councillor Polifka.
Yeah, look, I understand the rationale for the species which amplify the spread of the polyphagous shothole borer, and so I understand why they're currently on that list. How can we, I suppose, tag this for revision so that when we do get input, so once the treatment for the polyphagous shothole borer is proven, and these can potentially then come off the list, how will we keep a track of that so that that can occur?
Our environment team, who are very much keeping their tabs on this, I'm sure will inform us. The beauty of this list is it doesn't require advertising. It's a simple report to council to add or remove species off the list.
Yeah, no, that's as long as there's a mechanism, so once we do get the good news, those trees can then enjoy the protections they would have, but for the fact that they amplify the spread of the polyphagous shothole borer.
Can I just ask about the 3 species that are prone to shothole borer? And I do understand the comment that there's obviously scientific investigation, how to treat that particular pest, but is it the state government department that is dealing with the shothole borer infested trees? Is it their policy to remove all of the box maples that they come across, or do they simply look at the box maples and determine whether they're infested or not, and then remove them?
I'll need to take that question on notice, Member.
Okay, thank you. Councillors, further questions on this item? Okay. If there are no further questions, we'll move on to the next one, which is 12.5, and that is the Black Spot and Low Cost Urban Road Safety Grant Funding. And Mr. Asmus, thank you. I'm sure we'll enjoy hearing about this one. We've been looking forward to these installations.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Good evening, councillors. I prepared some notes, but then it's basically just a repetition of the report. So what I'll probably just do is, try and summarise the intent of the report and what we're recommending here, and a bit of background around the grant funding. So my understanding in the past, I'm not sure how long, but over the last 4 or 5 years, the town hasn't applied for black spot funding, and not really sure the reason why, but there is opportunities to certainly investigate and seek black spot funding, either state or federal funding. Federal funding is fully funded, so why wouldn't we? And state funding is 2/3, 1/3, so still advantageous. Part of our restructure recently, we created a bit of a focus on the traffic side of engineering. We appointed a traffic engineer that is now looking at these issues in detail, and pretty quickly we realised that there's a number of intersections straight away that meet the standards and requirements for black spot funding. So the first round, which is 2026-27, applications are due in, I think, in July. We've nominated 3 sites straight away that clearly meet the criteria and score actually really high in terms of what they call a benefit-cost ratio, which is the method of prioritising. And out of the 3, 2 will definitely receive federal funding, so fully funded, and the 3rd may also. Worst case, it'll receive state funding, which means we'll have to contribute a 3rd. So all up, if these are successful, I don't see why not. There's about $140,000 of income coming into the town that could be used on traffic management and hopefully reducing road trauma. So in terms of the black spot part of the report, we're seeking council approval to lodge those 3 sites as an application, and we won't find out till next year whether they're successful, but certainly confident they will be. The other part of the report is around the low-cost urban program, which this year we've participated for the first time in. That's some sites up at Success Hill was approved for the 24-25 budget. Those works are actually starting soon. What we're proposing here is the second stage, or the second program for next year and the year after, will be what we call Bassendean Central, which sort of takes into the area, West Road, Bredston, quite a big area there that's certainly been the subject of concerns and conversations over the last 6 months around traffic congestion, speeding, parking, with the proposed daycare and the primary school and the like. So we think that's the highest priority to move on to next. We've been liaising with Main Roads heavily on that. They're fully supportive of the town proceeding and basically have guaranteed the funding. So potentially over the 2, because it's a big area and there's quite a few treatments proposed, we've decided to stage it over 2 years, just in terms of being able to deliver. Again, subject to council approval, we'll proceed with gaining that funding and work on that project over the next 2 years, and that could generate about $420,000 of income, again, fully funded by, in this case, Main Roads or the state government. So basically seeking approval from council to proceed with nominating under those 2 programs.
Okay, thank you. If I can start off with the questions. Have no problems with the locations. I think they're all appropriate. My question is around the type of treatment that is being proposed, where most of them appear to be raised, elongated beds or whatever you'd like to call them. I'm curious about why that type of treatment is selected over and above other treatments, and I'll explain why. Near the corner, on the corner of Ilanthi and Broadway, you obviously have a roundabout and it is a curved entry into those roundabouts. Now, that particular roundabout used to be a prime area for accidents, some of them very serious. Since they installed the curved entrance into the roundabout, there's been almost no accidents. So I'm curious about, is it a very expensive treatment to do what has been done on that intersection as opposed to these other treatments that you're proposing?
Yeah, thanks, Madam. That's an excellent observation. So basically, to get the black spot funding, you need to initiate what we call countermeasures to deal with the type of crash. And as it turns out, for a roundabout in particular, there's basically two ways to reduce the speed of vehicles on the approach. One is with what we call deflection, pre-deflection, which is exactly how you explained it. So the idea is you slow the vehicle down on the approach by manoeuvring. The other way, which is a lot cheaper and less impact on the verge, less impact on what's in the verge, such as trees and services, is to install these low speed cushions. Now, they're 75mm high. They're not overly obtrusive or impact on the vehicles, but they're enough there to be able to slow the vehicle down on the approach. So the example you mentioned, Madam Mayor, would have cost a lot more than what we're proposing as part of these sites.
Okay, and I'm assuming that far more expensive treatment would potentially not get that level of funding. Would that be about right?
I couldn't say. It wouldn't take us long to work it out, but I suspect in this case that because of the limitations on the verge, and I'm assuming I'd have to go back and look at the design drawings. It's been a few weeks, but I suspect we looked at things like power poles, trees, services, and that governed, I guess, our rationale about going with the speed cushions as compared to the pre-deflection.
Okay. Thank you. Councillors, are there any other further questions? Councillor Polivka?
So I understand the pre-deflection, so that it makes it a little bit more difficult for people to manoeuvre through the roundabout. I also understand that if you sort of have things at the periphery of people's vision, they tend to slow down as well. Is there scope within this to incorporate the planting of additional trees to create that effect?
Certainly is. I'd probably, there's real opportunities. I'd probably be tempted to, there's probably nothing in the grant funding that would enable that, but I would have thought if it's considered to complement the treatment, that the town would, use its own funds to do it at the same time. So, in other words, potentially landscape the central island of the roundabout, or some of the verges on the approach. That's probably the preferred method that the Black Spot program would prefer as well.
Okay, thank you.
So, thank you. I do note that a couple of these are actually on Iolanthe. So the one that caught my attention was the proposal for the corner, the intersection of Scadden and Iolanthe, which is very, very close to that other one that I've mentioned, which is Broadway and Iolanthe. So just curious, there's clearly accidents there, it's been identified. I'm curious about how they have that many accidents in such a short stretch and whether the raised beds would actually stop that. You have some obviously information about how that methodology works in slowing traffic down.
Yeah, I'm a bit mindful too of sort of getting too much into the geometry of roundabouts and intersections, but it has been proven that that's what we call a four-way uncontrolled intersection, and I use it twice a day myself when I leave work. And you have that situation where there's confusion over who should be giving way, and you hope that the other person sort of waves to you or points to you and says, "You go first." It's really common on four-way intersections that you have those right-angle crashes for that reason. It's also a bus route. So the roundabout provides that clarity over who's got priority. That's why I believe roundabouts in certain situations are really effective. And that site in particular, I think, is a perfect position for a roundabout.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for that. As I said, no problem with the locations. I was just interested in the actual treatments that you're proposing. Councillors, if there are any other questions, we'll move on to the next one. which is 12.6, graffiti management policy.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll have a go at, I guess, just winging it again, but the policy really has come about for a number of reasons. One is that, well, firstly, the council did have a policy, and it was revoked in 2020. It was viewed at the time that due to the Gazettal of the Graffiti Vandalism Act 2016, which provided the council with powers to undertake graffiti on private property, that the town didn't need a policy at the time. So in 2020 it was revoked. I guess certainly in my time at the town in the last 12 months, there has been, or there is, a lot of instances of graffiti. There has been situations where there's been confusion, I guess, over whether the town can undertake graffiti removal, especially on private property. On public land we can and we do. So the idea of the policy really is to, I guess, is to clearly define what the town can and can't do, or what it should and shouldn't do, and also clarify priorities. So, you know, depending on the type of graffiti, when does it warrant removal? You know, can it wait? Is it urgent? So really the policy picks up on what the town should and shouldn't do on private and public land, and also talks about priority and when we should be acting. And just, I guess, further to that, to remind council that as part of from 25th of March 2025 at the ordinary council meeting, council resolved that the administration prepare a graffiti management policy for consideration prior to 30th June 2025. And this is that policy for consideration.
Thank you. I'll kick it off with a question. So in the actual policy, the draft policy, you've got Section 1, graffiti removal, and the last sentence of that reads, the town will not remove graffiti from any utility provider's infrastructure within public or private land. My question to you there is, should that not be expanded, that the town will notify those utility providers and government agencies of the graffiti and request that it be removed within 30 days?
I think that's definitely a good idea. Whether it goes in the policy or just operational, either way, I think it's worthwhile including for sure.
Okay. It seemed to me that if we're trying to enhance the area, then they should be equally responsible for their properties. The other one is... let me find it. Section 4, you got 4.2, 4.3, which indicates that, you know, if you've written to the property owner, the private property owner, and they have not responded, that the town can carry out the graffiti removal work, and it'll provide the owner or occupier a written notice that the work has occurred. But there's nothing in those policies that says that they will be compelled to pay for that work going forward.
That's correct. So under the first criteria, where the owner provides approval, then the discussion around the owner compensating the town can happen, and we can send them the bill for the works. If the owner basically says no, or refuses to remove the graffiti, or doesn't allow the town to get in there, based on the legislation, there's nothing that enables the town to then charge them for the work. So there seems to be a bit of a gap in the way the legislation's worded. So my take on it would be that it would have to be some pretty serious graffiti, pretty bad graffiti in a public spot that's visible, where the town would then go in and remove it and have to pay for it itself.
So I am aware of 4 properties where from the balcony of the upstairs balcony of the Bassendean Hotel, one can see that graffiti, which has been there for years, and the property owner has not, has been notified and has not actually actioned that at all. So that's an oversight in the legislation, is it not?
I suggest it is. Whether there's options that we still try and charge, I'm not sure. Legislation doesn't say that we can, but there must be some sort of avenue I would have thought to still follow it up. But sure.
Well, I think it should be for our state member. Yep, okay. Sorry.
Position statement.
Councillors, further questions? Councillor Plivka.
Yeah, I mean, that seems very perverse that if you cooperate, you are penalised and have to pay. If you ignore the notice, then you don't. Do we have, Wolga, confirmation that that is the effect of the legislation? I couldn't believe that legislation like that would be allowed out into the public domain.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's worth having the conversation, and to be honest, I haven't. So I think it needs to probably be clarified, and that can happen over the next couple of days. It's a good point.
Yeah, that'd be much appreciated. Thanks.
Thank you. Will you provide that clarity going forward?
Certainly will.
Thank you. Councillors, further questions? No? Okay. So we'll move on to the...
May I say, Madam Mayor, sorry, before I close off, that the recent removal of the graffiti on the back of the buildings at the settlement agency there on Old Perth Road, that was fronting Guildford Road and the train line, the town removed that graffiti in liaison with the owner of that building about probably 8 weeks ago. Very visual. You see it on Guildford Road and the railway line. That hasn't reappeared, so that's an example, I think, of the research that shows that prompt graffiti removal is the best way to deal with it. It was a bit of a trial to see, and at this point in time it hasn't reappeared, which is really promising.
Thank Don Yates for that.
Thank you. Okay, councillors, we'll move on to item 12.7, policy reviews, which seems very straightforward. I would ask if there is any additional information that you, the officers or CEO, would like to provide on that one.
Look, not unless there's going to be any questions. I think they are straightforward, and there is a confidential item later tonight which will probably take up a little bit more time. So,
Okay. So, councillors, if you have any questions, please speak up now or forever hold your peace, and we will move on to 12. As Councillor Plivka.
Yeah, just in terms of the councillor contact with developers policy, when developers are canvassing council members or the administration, will all of that sort of activity be recorded, or is it only when developers seek to canvass councillors for?
so the clarity you're seeking relates to developers talking to officers rather than...
Or talking to anyone to do with the town, so whether they're a councillor, an officer, just any instance where that contact is made.
So if I can assist there, if it was through the process of developers in discussion with the town, that would all of that would be recorded in the due process of our record keeping policy and procedures anyway, because any sort of contact, I think, through to the manager of planning and regulation, that would be any kind of situation like this. This is really about your a council member's interest and ensuring that you're not put at any advantage or disadvantage, or there is any perceived advantage or disadvantage to yourselves. So it's just better to have just the instance that it's in. I mean, we don't have a lot recorded currently, Councillor Plivka, so there's not a great issue with it, but it's more a protective measure for yourselves. And through the administration, our normal procedures would be that everything of that kind is recorded in some way, shape or form, through whether it's a recording of a meeting, whether it's the interaction that we've had.
No, look, I dare say there's excellent record keeping. I suppose I'm more concerned about the public facing, so that whether there's a register which is searchable on a website or something of that nature.
It's a register.
I might just refer quickly to the manager of planning in case he has any clarity.
A register of interactions that we have between planning staff and developers, no. There's obviously the register of approvals that are issued, and the building permit does list the builder. But in terms of daily interactions that we have on a daily basis, no, there's not a register of that. It's just as per our record-keeping requirements.
So, Councillor Plivka, the register that is online is the register between contact with councillors and developers.
Okay, so we're continuing to actively maintain that register.
I would
It's
assume.
legislatively required.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, great, thanks.
Okay, councillors, are there any further questions on this item? Okay, we move to 12.8, which is the RFT, supply and installation of an automated irrigation system. I note that there is a confidential attachment to this, so if any of your questions relate to the part of the confidential, we can deal with that when we're behind closed doors. But I'll ask the CEO if there's some additional.
No, Madam Mayor, just that we did discuss this at the last workshop, and I know there was a few councillors not present at the budget workshop last Tuesday, where this was raised in some detail, and this report reflects those conversations. But I might just throw it to the Director of Corporate Services. Paul, did you want to chime in?
Certainly, thanks, Cameron. Just briefly, obviously this is one of those tender processes where the process comes through corporate services, but the Director of Infrastructure is across the actual project in terms of the technical respects. But just in terms of the budget, what we have is obviously a tender process, a recommendation to award to the tenderer that we think provides the best value for the money, for the town. The budget is over the town's budget for the project. When we budgeted for this project, we budgeted for it over 2 years for various reasons. One, financial, and two, because that was likely to be the delivery period for the project. So what we're proposing to do is bring next year's budget forward and also to supplement the overall project budget as shown in the confidential attachment to provide sufficient funds to undertake the project. And we're seeking to do that now in May rather than next financial year so that the contract can be awarded. And that month we think is quite crucial for a project delivery to get them started on ordering materials and so on, so that the irrigation can be functional before the warmer weather hits around sort of November time.
Okay. Councillors, questions on this item? No? Okay. We'll move on to the next one, which is 12.9 monthly financial report, March 2025. Again, the report's self-explanatory. Councillors, do you have any questions on this item? Or Mr. White, did you want to comment on this item?
So perhaps just very briefly, Madam Mayor, this was presented last month, but it was a split recommendation. There was an absolute majority budget amendment decisions that were made by Council, and then there was the simple majority decision just to accept the monthly financial report that we overlooked. So that's why it's coming back this month.
Yes. I think I missed that completely. So thank you for that. Councillors, any questions on this? Okay, the next one was the monthly report for April, which will be available in next week's report. Then we've got the accounts paid, which is 12.11. Again, councillors, if you have any questions on that one, as usual, I'd request that you write to Mr. White and he will provide you details. So councillors will move to the confidential items, 16.1 and 16.2. So I would ask if we can close the doors and the recording. So I would like to declare the meeting closed at 8:08. The next ordinary council meeting will be held on Tuesday, the 24th of June, 2025, commencing at 6 p.m. Thank you, one and all. Thank you, staff. Thank you, councillors.